The universe's cry for help. 5 to 7 minute hook. The universe was dying. Stars flickered and then vanished. Planets that once teemed with life now lay in ruins. The peaceful hum of space was broken by the sounds of destruction. A dark force had risen, and it spread like a plague, leaving nothing but chaos and death in its wake. No one knew where it had come from or who was behind it. But one thing was clear: the universe was crying out for help. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had lived for millennia were torn apart in mere days. Entire fleets of ships were obliterated, reduced to dust by an unseen enemy. In the farthest corners of the cosmos, once thriving worlds were reduced to ash. Desperate, the surviving species sent out distress signals in every known language, hoping someone would hear them. In the cold, empty reaches of space, one of these cries for help reached the ears of an ancient, feared force: the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were not like the other beings in the universe. They were survivors of the harshest worlds, hardened by environments that would have broken any other species. Their very names struck fear into the hearts of those who had heard of them. They had fought, bled, and conquered. And now, the universe needed them. Captain Cade stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring out at the endless void of space. The crew moved around him, preparing the ship for departure, but Cade's mind was elsewhere. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair as he read the message they had received: a distress signal from a world called Silari, located on the edge of a galaxy that had already begun to fall. The message was brief but desperate. Help. We are losing everything. The dark force comes, and we have no hope left. We beg you, Deathworlders, please answer our call. Cade's jaw tightened. The words of the message echoed in his mind. The universe was reaching out, but was it too late? The fear was palpable in the crew's eyes as they all knew the stakes. There was no turning back now. The Deathworlder fleet was vast, made up of ships that could strike fear into the hearts of the most powerful empires. Each one of their ships was a fortress, designed to endure and destroy. But even they couldn't be sure what awaited them in the unknown space beyond. The dark force that was consuming the galaxy was something new, something they had never faced before. "We're ready, Captain Rowe," the fleet's communications officer said, her voice steady, but with a hint of unease. She looked up at Cade, her expression unreadable. "The fleet is mobilizing. The message has spread to the others. They're all coming." Cade nodded but didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of what was about to happen. He had led his people into countless battles before, but this was different. There was no guarantee of victory, and there was no time to waste. The Vanguard slowly turned, its engines coming to life, cutting through the void of space. The other ships of the Deathworlder fleet followed suit, forming up behind the captain's ship. They were leaving the safety of their home worlds, venturing into the unknown. All of them knew this could be their final mission. As the fleet left their galaxy behind, a sense of dread hung over them. Each ship was heavily armed, ready for war, but there was no telling what kind of enemy they would face. Reports from the farthest reaches of the universe had spoken of strange, deadly forces, beings of darkness and shadows that destroyed everything in their path, but left no trace. Some believed it was the end of the universe itself, an unstoppable force of nature that would soon consume all. The stars outside the ship's windows looked different now, their usual warmth and light dimmed by the ever-growing shadow of the enemy. Cade's thoughts raced as they traveled deeper into the unknown. What had caused this? Who were these invaders? And most importantly, why were they targeting this part of the galaxy? Rowe's voice broke through his thoughts. "Captain, we're nearing the Silari system. We're getting some strange readings. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Cade straightened in his chair. "What kind of readings?" "It's hard to explain, sir," Rowe said, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's like the fabric of space itself is being torn apart. We're seeing anomalies, disturbances in the space-time continuum. It's as if the very laws of the universe are being broken. Cade's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an attack. It was something far worse, something that could unravel everything they knew about existence itself. "Alert the fleet," Cade ordered, his voice sharp. "Prepare for anything." The crew scrambled to respond, sending out warnings to the other ships. But even Cade knew that no amount of preparation could prepare them for what lay ahead. The universe had cried out for help, and the Deathworlders had answered. But whether they could survive the coming storm was still uncertain. As the Vanguard entered the auxiliary system, a chill ran down Cade's spine. The space around them was silent, eerily so. No enemy ships in sight, no signs of life. It was as if the whole system had been abandoned. Except for one thing. A massive black cloud, swirling and pulsating with an unnatural energy, loomed ahead. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't just a storm. It was something alive. Cade's grip tightened on his chair. This was just the beginning. The Deathworlder fleet mobilizes. The universe's desperate call had reached the ears of the Deathworlders, and now their response was underway. The fleet, a terrifying assembly of ships built for combat and survival in the harshest environments, began to mobilize. Captain Cade stood at the helm of the Vanguard, watching as his crew scrambled to prepare for the unknown. Their mission was clear: reach the auxiliary system, assess the threat, and do whatever it took to stop the dark force that was consuming everything. But as they moved deeper into space, the uncertainty of the situation settled in like a heavy fog. The fleet wasn't just responding to a typical distress signal. This was different. This was something that threatened the very fabric of the universe itself. Cade ran his fingers through his short, cropped hair, trying to think through the layers of what they were up against. He was a battle-hardened veteran of countless wars, but even he had never faced anything like this. The Deathworlders had always been known for their strength, their ruthless efficiency in combat. But against an enemy like this, something that could tear apart entire galaxies with no explanation, they weren't sure they stood a chance. The fleet was vast, made up of some of the most powerful ships ever built. Each one was a fortress in its own right, designed to endure and retaliate. But as the fleet gathered in formation, the silence was deafening. There was no cheer, no victory chants, just the cold, calculated focus of soldiers preparing for a fight. Cade had led his people into battles before, but this was different. The enemy was unknown, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. "Captain," Rose's voice broke the silence, her tone steady but filled with an undertone of concern. "We've analyzed the distress signal again. It's the same message, but there's something strange about it. The signal, it's not just a plea for help. It's like a warning." Cade turned to her, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "What do you mean, a warning?" "I can't explain it fully," Rose continued, her hands flying over the communication controls. "It's as if the signal is somehow drawing us in, like the universe itself wants us to engage. There's an energy to it, something almost predatory." A chill ran down Cade's spine. He knew what she was implying. This might not be a typical enemy they could just crush under the weight of their fleet. This could be something far worse. "Continue to analyze it," Cade ordered, his voice a low growl. "Keep me updated." As the fleet moved toward the auxiliary system, the space around them grew darker, more foreboding. The stars that had once illuminated the endless void now appeared dull, their light fading as if swallowed by an invisible force. It was as if the very universe was being consumed from the inside out. The destruction that had been reported from the outer galaxies was beginning to feel real, to feel close. Cade stared out into the void, his thoughts racing. He had seen galaxies fall before, civilizations crumble, but never at this scale. The thought of it unsettled him. What could do this? What kind of enemy could break the very laws of nature? "Captain," Rose said again, breaking his reverie. "We're approaching the outer edges of the auxiliary system. We've picked up more readings. It's not just the energy readings we've been tracking. There's something else. A massive disturbance, like a ripple in the fabric of space itself. It's unnatural. Cade's fists clenched. How far? We're within range, Ro replied, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. This is bigger than anything we've ever faced. Cade turned back to face the view of the vast expanse ahead. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a call for help. It was a test, one that would determine whether the Deathworlders were truly as unstoppable as their reputation suggested. The fleet was within the auxiliary system now, and the strange readings were becoming harder to ignore. The black cloud that had been detected earlier was much closer now, and it was growing in size. It swirled in the distance, its dark, swirling mass unlike anything they had encountered. It felt alive, shifting and pulsing with an eerie energy that sent a shiver down Cade's spine. "Prepare for battle," Cade said, his voice cold with determination. "Whatever this is, we face it head-on." The fleet moved closer, the heavy hum of their engines vibrating through the ships. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Cade's heart pounded in his chest as he knew that once they crossed into the heart of the system, there would be no turning back. This was it, the moment they either triumphed or perished. As they neared the cloud, the readings grew more intense. The atmosphere inside the Vanguard seemed to crackle with energy. The crew could feel it. Something was coming. The unknown force that had torn through galaxies now loomed before them, and it was waiting. "Captain," Ro's voice broke through, more urgent now. "It's not just energy readings. We've detected something else, something alive within that cloud." Cade's eyes widened. "Alive?" "Yes, Captain. Whatever this is, it's alive. And it's moving." The tension in the air was palpable. The Deathworlders had faced many threats, but nothing that had ever felt so unnatural, so alien. "This is no longer just a rescue mission," Cade murmured under his breath. "We are in the heart of the storm, the heart of the darkness." The black cloud loomed larger with each passing minute. It consumed the stars, a vast and swirling abyss that stretched out like a living nightmare. As the Deathworlder fleet edged closer to its heart, the sense of unease grew heavier. What lay within this storm was unlike anything they had ever encountered, and the longer they stared into its depths, the more they could feel its unnatural pull. Captain Cade stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, his eyes locked onto the swirling mass ahead. He could feel the cold presence of something ancient and malevolent, something that didn't belong in the universe. His grip tightened on the armrest of his chair as he prepared for whatever was to come. "We're getting closer," Ro said, her voice calm but laced with tension. "The energy readings are spiking again. It's like a gravity well, pulling us in." Cade's jaw tightened. He could feel it too. The way the ship seemed to strain against an invisible force. Every instinct told him to turn back, to retreat from the darkness that was closing in around them. But there was no turning back now. The fleet was committed, and the universe had called for help. They would answer, or they would perish trying. "Status report from the fleet," Cade ordered. The communications officer, Lyra, tapped at her console. "All ships are maintaining position, Captain. No signs of hostility yet, but the cloud's gravitational pull is interfering with our systems. We're having trouble maintaining communication with the other ships." Cade's eyes flicked to the view screen. The other ships of the Deathworlder fleet were scattered behind him, forming a defensive formation around the Vanguard. They were ready for anything, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead was suffocating. "I don't like this," Ro muttered under her breath, her fingers moving rapidly over her console. "The readings are so erratic. It's like the very fabric of space is unstable here." "What's causing it?" Cade asked, his voice low but urgent. "We don't know," Ro replied, her voice tight. "It's as if the laws of physics are being warped. There are pockets of space within the cloud that don't make sense. Distorted time, broken light. Everything's out of sync." Cade's thoughts raced. He had fought countless battles, against fleets, armies, and creatures unlike anything found in the peaceful worlds of the galaxy. But this was something different. It wasn't just a physical enemy they were facing. It was an enemy that defied nature itself. "We need to know what we're dealing with," Cade said. "Prepare the recon drones. We'll send them into the cloud and see if we can get a better look." Within moments, several drones were launched from the Vanguard and into the swirling cloud. The crew watched as they disappeared into the darkness, their screens showing only static and distortion. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the first drone's signal returned. The screen flickered to life, revealing a distorted image of what lay beyond. The drone's sensors were barely able to maintain a clear signal, but through the chaos, something became visible, a shape, large and imposing, floating within the heart of the cloud. It was unlike anything Cade had ever seen before. A massive structure, dark and jagged, stretched across the drone's view. It seemed to pulse with unnatural energy, shifting and changing like a living organism. The shape twisted in ways that defied reason, bending at impossible angles and exuding a sense of malevolent power. It was as if the very fabric of reality bent around it, warping and tearing at the seams. "Captain," Rose said, her voice shaky. What is that thing?" Cade didn't answer at first. His eyes were locked on the image before him. It was like a giant, dark creature, or perhaps a monument, an ancient force that had been lying in wait for eons. The twisted structure seemed to breathe, its surface alive with pulses of dark energy. Cade could feel the weight of its presence, even through the screen. "What is it?" Roe repeated, more urgently now. "I don't know," Cade replied, his voice grim. "But it's not natural. It shouldn't be here. We need to approach with caution." Suddenly, the image flickered, and the drone's signal cut out. Static filled the screen as the crew scrambled to restore the connection. But it was too late. The drone was gone. "Status of the other drones?" Cade demanded. "We've lost contact with all of them, Captain," Lyra said, her face pale. "The cloud is. It's interfering with everything. We can't get a clear read on anything inside." Cade's pulse quickened. The universe had cried out for help, and they had answered. But what they were facing now was not a simple threat. This was something ancient, something that had been waiting for a time like this to rise. He turned to Roe. "Get me a direct line to the fleet. We're going in." Roe hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Aye, Captain." The Vanguard's engines roared to life as they pushed forward into the cloud. The rest of the fleet followed closely behind, their weapons primed, their systems ready for any battle. The atmosphere inside the ship was tense, every crew member on edge as they moved deeper into the heart of the unknown. As they entered the dark mass, the space around them seemed to distort. The ship's controls became sluggish, the instruments flickering as if the laws of physics themselves were no longer reliable. The hum of the ship's engines sounded hollow, as though the very air around them had changed. Cade's eyes scanned the view screen, searching for any sign of movement, but all he saw was the suffocating darkness. The force that had consumed the universe was now before them, and they were its prey. Suddenly, a loud, unnatural screech filled the bridge. It was followed by a shockwave that rattled the ship, throwing everyone off balance. The crew scrambled to maintain control, the ship groaning as the force of the wave pushed against them. Cade gripped the armrests, his teeth clenched as the ship struggled to stay on course. "We're being pulled in," Roe shouted. "The gravitational force is too strong. We can't hold the fleet back." Cade's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment they had been preparing for, but it felt nothing like what they had imagined. Whatever was inside the cloud had made its presence known, and it wasn't going to let them leave without a fight. He turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Hold on, everyone. We're not turning back now." The enemy revealed. The Vanguard's engines groaned under the strain as the ship continued to struggle against the unnatural force that pulled them deeper into the heart of the dark cloud. The crew was on edge, each member watching their stations, ready for anything, but knowing nothing could fully prepare them for what was about to unfold. The unknown enemy, hidden within the heart of this unnatural storm, was still a mystery. Cade's hands gripped the console tighter as the ship's instruments flickered erratically. The crew had long since lost their communication with the rest of the fleet. Now it was just the Vanguard, alone in the black void, surrounded by a sense of foreboding that grew thicker by the second. "Captain," Ro's voice broke the silence, her tone tinged with dread. "We're not alone." Cade turned to face her, his gaze hardening. He could already feel the change in the air, the oppressive weight of something ancient pressing in around them. It was as if the very space they were occupying had begun to twist and distort, making it impossible to determine what was real. "Explain," Cade said, his voice steady, though the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. "The readings are shifting again," Ro replied, her eyes wide as she scanned the screen. It's like something is moving within the cloud, something that's getting closer. I can't track it directly, but it's there. And it's massive." Cade's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Whatever it was, this entity was aware of their presence. It was reacting to their arrival, responding to the Deathworlders' intrusion into its domain. And from what Ro was describing, it wasn't just a passive force. It was an active, conscious threat. Without warning, a deep rumble shook the Vanguard. It wasn't a tremor, but a low guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the ship itself. It was as if the entire universe around them was groaning in anger. "Brace for impact," Cade shouted, just as the ship's hull began to tremble. A flash of light erupted from the center of the black cloud, a burst of energy that illuminated the surrounding darkness. For a moment, everything went silent, except for the pounding of the crew's hearts. The Vanguard shuddered as the burst of energy slammed into its shields, sending a shockwave through the ship. The shields held, but just barely. "Report," Cade barked, his voice sharp. "We're holding," Ro said, her hands flying across the console. "Shields at 45% and dropping." That blast nearly took them out. Whatever that was, it's powerful. Cade's eyes narrowed. They had entered the heart of the storm, and now they had made their first real contact with whatever was waiting for them inside. The time for caution was over. The enemy had revealed itself in the form of raw, destructive energy, and there was no turning back. "I want full tactical analysis now," Cade ordered. "We're not getting a clean read," Captain Lyra, the communications officer, responded, her voice tense. "The cloud is distorting everything. But from what we can gather, that burst came from something large, something beyond our comprehension. It's almost like a living entity." Cade stood still, his mind racing. A living entity. Was this some kind of cosmic creature? Or was it something far more sinister, something that defied all laws of nature? Suddenly, the view screen blinked to life, showing a chaotic, shifting image. The static cleared for a fraction of a second, and what they saw made Cade's blood run cold. At the center of the storm, something enormous was taking shape. It was as if the very fabric of space was bending around it. A colossal, shadowy figure slowly emerged from the cloud. Its form was indistinct, constantly changing, as though it were made of both light and shadow. Tendrils of energy flickered around it, twisting and warping reality itself. "This can't be real," Ro whispered, her voice barely audible. That thing. It's alive." Cade's eyes fixed on the creature. It was enormous, its presence dominating the view screen, a living mass of darkness and energy. The Deathworlder fleet had faced many enemies who had tried to crush them with sheer force, or cunning, or technology. But this was something else entirely, something that was both beyond their understanding and terrifying in its power. "We need to get out of here," Ro said, her voice shaking with panic. "No," Cade said, his voice cold and steady. "We stay and fight. We're the only ones who can stand up to this." The creature seemed to respond to his words. The air around them grew even heavier, the temperature dropping as if the very atmosphere was being sucked into the creature's gravitational pull. The Deathworlders had faced many battles, but this was something new. This wasn't just an enemy they could fight. It was something that could tear apart their very existence. As the ship struggled against the pull of the entity, another blast of energy erupted from the creature's core, slamming into the Vanguard's shields again. This time, the shields flickered ominously, and the entire ship shook violently. The lights flickered, and the crew was thrown off balance as the shockwave reverberated through the ship. "Shields at 20%. Ro cried out. "If we take another hit like that, we'll be defenseless." Cade's mind raced, but his resolve only hardened. The universe had called for help. Now it was their turn to answer. "We're not backing down," Cade said firmly. "Get the fleet in position. Prepare all weapons. It's time to show this thing what Deathworlders are capable of." The battle for survival. The Vanguard shields flickered, barely holding against the immense pressure of the entity's power. Cade gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles white, as the vibrations from the latest blast reverberated through the ship. The crew was already on high alert, eyes darting between their consoles, waiting for the next wave of destruction. Outside the windows, the vast, shifting mass of darkness seemed to pulse, alive and angry, as if it was aware of every movement they made. "We can't take another hit like that," Rose said, her voice strained. "Shields are at 10% and falling fast. The ship won't survive much longer if we don't find a way to counter this." Cade's mind raced. Every instinct told him to retreat, to pull back and regroup, but he knew that would mean certain death for the rest of the galaxy. This creature, this force from the depths of the cloud, was a threat unlike any they had ever encountered. If they ran, it would only follow, relentless and unyielding. "We need to make it vulnerable," Cade muttered to himself, more to the crew than to anyone in particular. "We need to hit it where it hurts." Ro turned to him, eyes wide. "How do we even begin to fight something like that? It's beyond us." Cade's gaze locked onto the view screen. The massive entity was still shifting, constantly changing its form, its vast size defying the very laws of physics. Every pulse of energy it released sent tremors through space itself, and the gravitational distortions made it impossible to predict where it would strike next. But there was something about the creature's movements, a pattern, however faint, that suggested a weakness. Cade's eyes narrowed as he studied its form. It wasn't just a mindless, chaotic force. It was intelligent. It had purpose. And if it had purpose, it could be outsmarted. "Ro, get me a direct connection to the fleet," Cade ordered. "Tell them to fire on the creature's core, but in precise bursts. No wide-range shots. We need to disrupt its energy flow." The communications officer, Lyra, quickly typed in the command, but there was still a moment of hesitation before Ro responded. "Captain, we don't have enough power left. Our weapons won't do anything if we don't concentrate our fire." Cade's jaw clenched. He knew the situation was dire, but he wasn't about to give up without a fight. "Then we'll use what we have. We'll hit it hard and fast. We won't wait for it to tear us apart." The crew began preparing the weapon systems, their movements swift and precise. The sound of the ship's weapons charging echoed through the bridge. Cade could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The Vanguard was their only hope. And with its shields rapidly failing, the time to act was now. "Firing sequence ready," Ro reported. "We're targeting the creature's core. Prepare for impact." Cade nodded. He didn't need any more words. He just needed results. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The ship's weapons discharged, sending concentrated blasts of energy directly toward the creature's shifting form. The bolts of light streaked across the dark expanse of the cloud, colliding with the creature's core. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature seemed to absorb the energy, its form rippling as the blasts dissipated into nothingness. Cade's heart sank. Was it invincible? But then, something unexpected occurred. The creature recoiled, its form twisting violently as if in pain. The deep, guttural screech echoed across the void, a sound so powerful it reverberated through the ship's hull. Cade's ears rang from the sheer force of it, but he didn't have time to react. The entity was weakening. He could see it now. It had been struck, and it was no longer invulnerable. "Captain," Rose shouted, her voice full of hope. "It worked. We've triggered a reaction. It's destabilizing." Cade's pulse quickened. Fire again, full force. The Deathworlder fleet unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, each one aimed at the creature's core. The sheer volume of firepower was enough to overwhelm the entity's defenses. For the first time since they entered the cloud, the creature's form began to falter. It wavered, losing its grip on the space around it, as though its hold on reality was slipping. But it wasn't over yet. With a ferocious roar, the creature lashed out, sending a wave of pure energy toward the fleet. The shockwave hit the Vanguard first, throwing everyone off balance. The ship groaned, its hull creaking as the energy wave slammed into its weakened shields. "Shields at 5%. Rose shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "We can't take much more of this." Cade's mind raced, but his focus was clear. They couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. The creature was weakening, but it still had enough power to destroy them in an instant. They had one last chance to finish it off. "Push forward," Cade ordered. "All ships, concentrate fire on the creature's core." Now, with renewed determination, the Deathworlder fleet surged forward, every ship firing its weapons in synchronized bursts. The blasts collided with the creature's core, each shot weakening it further. Cade could feel the shift in momentum, the creature's immense power starting to crumble under the constant assault. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The creature's form flickered once more, as though caught between life and death. Then, with one final deafening scream, it imploded, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, causing the entire fleet to brace for impact. The Vanguard's shields shattered in the explosion's wake, the ship rocked by the force of the blast. The crew scrambled to regain control, their every instinct telling them to prepare for the worst. But as the shockwave faded, they realized something incredible. The creature was gone. The heart of the storm had been destroyed, and with it, the threat to the universe. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the crew began to exhale, their bodies still tense with the aftermath of the battle. Cade stood, his heart still racing, his eyes locked onto the view screen. The black cloud had dissipated, leaving behind nothing but the empty void. "We did it," Rose said quietly, almost in disbelief. Cade nodded, his gaze hard. "The universe has been saved, but we can't forget this. This is only the beginning." A universe changed. The Vanguard hung in the silence of the void, its battered hull slowly drifting away from the remnants of the storm. The last echoes of the battle were fading, and the universe seemed to exhale in relief. The Deathworlder fleet had won. The entity that had terrorized the galaxy was no more, but the silence on the bridge was unsettling. The crew had just defeated a cosmic force beyond comprehension, yet there was a heavy weight in the air that none of them could shake. "We've done it," Rose said, her voice softer than usual. "It's over." Cave stood at the helm, staring into the void. His face was set in a grim expression, his thoughts far from the fleeting relief the others were feeling. They had won, but at what cost? The galaxy had been saved from the entity, but something had changed. The storm had not only been a physical force, it had been a harbinger of something darker, something far larger than they could comprehend. "Captain," Rose's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Cade turned to face her, his brow furrowed in thought. "I'm fine, Ro. I'm just thinking." The crew had fought a battle they hadn't been prepared for, and they had emerged victorious. But the universe they knew had changed forever. No longer was it just a collection of stars and civilizations. They had seen the depths of space, the forces beyond their control. The very fabric of the cosmos had been bent by something ancient, something that had been lying dormant, waiting. The entity, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. It didn't just come out of nowhere. That storm, it wasn't natural. It felt like it was a sign, like something worse is coming. Cade turned to Lyra, meeting her gaze with a level of seriousness that chilled her to the bone. You're right. It wasn't natural. And that means this is far from over. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions hardening. Cade wasn't the only one who felt it. A shift in the fabric of space. It wasn't just the creature. It was the way the universe itself had felt, bending, breaking, collapsing in on itself. What if they had only scratched the surface of something far more dangerous? What if there was a greater threat lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike? Captain, Rose said slowly, her voice hesitant. What do we do now? What comes next? Cade took a deep breath and stood tall, his expression resolute. We do what we've always done. We fight. But we're not just protecting the universe from threats anymore. We're going to find out what caused this, and we're going to stop it before it destroys everything. Rose nodded, a fire igniting in her eyes. The crew had seen the horrors of the universe, and now they would see the true cost of their actions. They had disrupted something ancient and powerful. The entity they had just defeated was only a symptom of a much greater disease spreading through the galaxy. Prepare the fleet, Cade continued. We're going to the center of the storm. There's something there that we need to understand. The silence on the bridge was thick. No one spoke for a moment, but all knew the gravity of Cade's words. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The galaxy was about to be shaken to its core, and the Deathworlder fleet would be the ones to answer the call once again. Back on the Vanguard, the crew waited in tense silence, every eye on the screen as the shuttle made its way toward the structure. Cade knew the stakes. If this was what they feared it was, there was no turning back. They had already unlocked a part of the universe that had been sealed away. The knowledge they sought could change the course of history, or unravel it entirely. As the shuttle landed with a soft thud, the crew held their breath. The doors slowly opened, revealing an entrance bathed in eerie light. The soldiers stepped out, their weapons raised, ready for anything. They had entered the heart of the storm, and now they were about to uncover the truth. The silence was deafening. And then, with a sudden shift, the structure's massive doors slowly creaked open, revealing the unknown. Cade's voice broke the silence. Whatever we find in there, we face it together. Stay sharp and be prepared for anything.